Hey, work from homers, Adam Schrader here. We love bringing you this podcast, and thousands of you have proven that it's been helpful for you. But since time and online storage space aren't free, Naresh and I wanted to come to you personally to ask for your financial support through Patreon. Go to patreon.com/workfromhomeshow and help support the show. And we appreciate your support at any amount you choose. That's patreon.com/workfromhomeshow. Thanks for your support. Let's get to the show.
Forced to work from home by your employer? Laid off or feeling depressed at home? Do you want to make money working from anywhere? We'll show you how to do it from your couch. It's time for another episode of the Work From Home Show. Coming to you from their homes in Austin, Texas and Tampa, Florida, here are your hosts, Adam and Naresh.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Work From Home Show. I'm Naresh Vissa, along with Adam Schrader. Today we have Lisa Cron on the show. She's the multiple #1 best-selling author of Story Genius, How to Use Brain Science to Go Beyond Outlining and Write a Riveting Novel Before You Waste 3 years Writing 327 Pages That Go Nowhere, as well as the book Wired for Story, the writer's guide to using brain science to hook readers from the very first sentence, and the new book Story or Die, How to Use Brain Science to Engage, Persuade, and Change Minds in Business and in Life. Wow, that sounds really interesting. Changing minds is a very, very difficult thing to do, especially in today's social media era, and of course, the even ever more political divide that the world faces. So without further ado, Lisa Cron, welcome to the Work From Home Show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, let's start with what I just said. You wrote your latest book is Story or Die, How to Use Brain Science to Engage, Persuade, and Change Minds in Business and in Life. Is it really possible to change people's minds on anything, especially, let's say, after the age of 25, once the prefrontal cortex and the neurology is fully developed?
Absolutely. I mean, I think you can't change somebody's mind about anything. Obviously, as we know, there are certain beliefs that are so deeply inculcated that, yes, it would be very difficult to get someone to change their minds. But one thing that we know now, in terms of changing minds or just, being able to adapt and being adaptive, is that our brains are far more plastic than we thought they were. So the answer is absolutely. I mean, the question is, people change their minds when they learn new things or when experience teaches them that something that they thought was true turns out not to be true all the time. And it often happens when we don't have a choice. In other words, something is happening and you have to reevaluate what you already believe, because what you already believe is not helping you to avoid whatever problem is now landing in your lap. And then life teaches you that, wait a minute, that thing that I thought was true might not be true. Here's what's actually true. And that corrects our misbeliefs, because the way that we were able to evolve and get here was by being able to adapt. And we are very adaptive, again, or else we wouldn't be here, and we certainly wouldn't be as we are at the head of the food chain. When it comes to changing somebody's mind about something, that's very different. In other words, life can change our mind about things because the way that we make sense of things, the meaning that we read into the world and the decisions that we make, and of course that other people make, comes from one place and one place only. And it comes from what our past experience has taught us those things mean, and what our past experience has taught us we need to do in order to survive and be safe. And not just safe, in the physical world, like, look both ways before you cross the street, but as important, actually more important on one level, in the social world, meaning how do we stay in good standing with what we might think of as our tribe, or the group that matters to us, that we are part of. So experience can teach us and make us change our minds about something, expand, learn to see things differently. And the only other thing that can do that is the world's first virtual reality that has been here long before now, when it was, technology and we had to have that geeky visor to do it. But the world's first virtual reality is story, and story is the only other way that we can change people's minds about something, because story literally is, again, virtual reality. Story actually causes us to put time out biologically in our participation in the actual world that we're living in, and catapults us into the world of the story. They've done functional MRI studies that show when you're lost in a story, same areas of your brain light up that would light up if you were doing what the person in the story is doing. And when I say story is the world's first virtual reality, I don't mean that just in the sense that we tend to think of story now, which is like, a novel or a movie or a TV show or something long form, even a short story, but story in terms of how it really evolved and how it is built into our brain, because story is built into the architecture of our brain. Story, internal narrative, is how we make sense of everything in our lives. So a story can be a mission statement, a story can be a tweet, a story can be 2 words, but it is in order to change someone's mind when we are going in, and that's our agenda, right? I want to change your mind about something. I want you to vote for my candidate or buy my product or fund my startup. In order to do that, to create a story capable of changing someone's mind about something or expanding their worldview or even showing them something that hadn't even occurred to them yet, what you first have to do, and this is the hard part, is you have to be able to step out of your own worldview and step into theirs, and not just understand how they see the world, but the meaning that they are reading into the things that happen in the world. In other words, it's not about what they do, it's about why. It's not about what they believe, it's about why. And the only way to do that, as I say, is to be able to sort of step into their worldview. In other words, to be able to empathize with them. And that's something that I think the world could use a lot more of right now, which is empathy. It doesn't mean that when we can empathize with why someone does something that we agree with it or think it's right or okay, especially if it's damaging someone else. But it means that we understand what it is and what they believe that causes them to do that and what it means to them. And then perhaps we can create a story that speaks to their story. And that really is the key thing, speaking story to story.
Yeah, and I think what you bring up regarding storytelling and changing minds is it's always been very important. And if we tie it into, let's say, the last 2 years, and with the pandemic, the whole vaccine debate, you have people who rush to get the vaccine, and then you have a good chunk of people who said, I'm never going to put this thing in my body. And I think the government or healthcare leaders should hire you to try to see if you can change people's minds. So let's say to get the vaccine. And I'm actually of the mindset, I don't want to call myself an anti-vaxxer, but I was originally of the mindset, hey, you know what? I take care of myself. I take care of my body. I don't go out much since I'm a stay-at-home dad. I don't go to too many social events, so I'm not going to get the vaccine. But then the fundamentals of the virus, of the pandemic changed. And I didn't need a story. Well, actually, you know what? You would probably say there's a story that changed my mind. And yeah, there were a few stories that changed my mind. But let's just say the fundamentals changed, and the fundamentals were communicated through the stories that I heard firsthand, through friends, whatnot, spouse, family. And I changed my mind.
Clarify one spouse.
Yeah. Yep. Well, other people's friends, spouses as well. And so I changed my mind, and I actually take pride in changing my mind. But I guess most people, they don't want to change their mind. They're set one way, and no matter what you show them, you can feed them stories, facts, data, whatever, and they won't change it. But I'm not like that. I actually take pride and want to change my mind. Adam's changed my mind a few times about some things, and I think that's just a better way, a better, safer way to live life. But what do you have to say about all of this, and as it applies to today?
Well, I think part of your personal narrative then is that you are someone with an open mind who can take things in and take new
Yeah.
information, and you're not really tied to your beliefs in some sort of, and I think this is one of the biggest problems with people who are vaccine resistant, is that you're not governed by an external ideology. And I think that that's one of the most dangerous things out there. But I think the reason that people will hew to an ideology often has to do, again, with the group or tribe that they identify with. And what's most important to them is that they're in good standing, with their community and with their tribe, because literally, and it comes back to the fact that that is how we're wired. We're wired to live in a world that we don't live in anymore, and we're wired to feel like the most important thing is to belong to a group and to be with that group in good standing. And the way that we show that is to hew to the same belief system that they've got. So to ask somebody to change, and the reason I think people double down on what they believe, in fact, there's a thing called the boomerang effect, whereas if you give someone, say, who's anti-vaccine, and now a new piece of information has come out, and you think, well, I'll give them that because who could refute that? You'll give them that new piece of information, and as opposed to them taking it in and considering it and thinking about it, they do think about it for a sec, and then they come up with some other reason they haven't even thought of yet to refute it. And now they've got a new piece of ammunition, that's going to really help them double down on what they already believe. I mean, I think part of it is a biological notion of the business term sunk costs. You've spent so much time talking about how much you believe something, to turn around and then say that maybe you don't believe it is really kind of terrifying. And again, it can have your whole entire social group turn against you. And really interestingly, I think one thing that we've all noticed, when you want to talk to somebody, whichever side of the divide you're on, and sort of, I always was someone who was waiting for the vaccine. I got it the minute I could get it. I was just 100% in that camp. And I know if I was trying to, convince someone who was a complete anti-vaxxer, and you might notice, and you go, what's wrong with them? They get so angry, and they yell and they scream, and there's invectives, and what's happening. I know the same thing happens to me if somebody starts to tell me why, vaccines are, it's Bill Gates who's going to put some sort of a tracker in me, or it's a hoax, or it's, whatever the misinformation.
Well, that's story time. They're so strongly believe these things because they heard this story somewhere.
Absolutely. But what happens is, though, and this is interesting because it's even when you're trying to give somebody a fact, just a fact that contradicts the facts that they believe, what happens is that what awakens in your brain is your brain reacts in the exact same way it would react as if somebody was coming and saying, put up your dukes, fight with me. Anything that disagrees with what we already believe awakens our limbic system. And it is because once we believe something, it becomes part of our self-identity. It becomes part of how we see ourselves. It becomes part of how we hew to our tribe. And to challenge that means that we might say something or do something that might get us ostracized. And if we get ostracized, especially like 100,000 years ago or so, when our brain had that last big growth spurt, and when the need to belong to a group or a tribe became as hardwired as our need for food, air, and water. Biologically, we're all people who need people. To lose that, especially back in the day, if you were ostracized, you were literally left to die. So that your well-being isn't just, I don't want someone to come and, hit me over the head with a hammer because I could, physically die. Your brain reacts the same way if somebody gives you a fact that fights with your own self-identity and how you hew to your group, because if you agree with it, you could get ostracized and you could be left to die. And so we are literally wired to get angry when somebody comes and says something that so flies in the face of what we believe, which is why when you want to try to change somebody's mind about something that is that seminal, sometimes, let's face it, you just can't. And other times there are other ways to come in as opposed to a full frontal attack, which is, I think, as we've all seen, no matter which side of the divide you're on in the past 2 years, in the past, 6 years, if you talk to somebody on the other side, they tend to get angry. And when they come and tell you why what you believe is wrong, you feel that feeling of, I mean, that metaphor of your blood boils feels pretty accurate. So, yeah, I think stories are the only way. They actually say that the only way for people who are, I mean, again, people who are so deeply entrenched, that's pretty much it. But anybody who's not that deeply entrenched, that not only does it need to be a story that speaks to their story, but it needs to be somebody from their tribe. It's why they're saying having celebrities or even politicians come and saying, get the vaccine now, it's important, isn't as effective as having your doctor or somebody who you really trust, or your, if you're religious in some way, you're your spiritual leader coming around and saying, no, I thought that before. I thought what you thought, but what I've realized is, and that is really, in many cases, the only way to get through to people, because they already trust that person. That person's already a member of their tribe.
Well, two things based on what you just said. First off, I think that divide has been going on for much, much longer than 6 years. The difference is everyone has a voice now. Everyone can tell their story through social media. They didn't have platforms back in 1996, or I remember 2000, really 2000 to 2004. Seemed, I was much younger, but it seemed very polarizing around the water cooler. But there was nowhere where you could share these ideas or vent the frustrations. But the other thing, just so our listeners know, so that because they're hearing me for the first time, they might be thinking, "Oh, Naresh is an anti-vaxxer," which I'm not. I just always ask the question. I'm a millennial. I'm young. I take care of my body. I take vitamins. I'm almost a vegan. I really took this pandemic seriously, my health seriously after the pandemic hit. And so I would always ask the question, well, what are the long-term side effects of this vaccine? I want to know 8 years, 10 years down the road. I understand if you're 65 years old, 70 years old, if I was that age, absolutely, I would line up to take that vaccine. But at my age, I just want to know the long-term side effects. But I did say, I did tell myself and those closest to me that I will absolutely take the vaccine if a new, more contagious virus miraculously appeared, because the numbers were only getting better and better and better. But if a new, more contagious virus came and started killing or infecting people with symptoms who were vaccinated, then I would get the vaccine. And so when one of the variants hit recently and people who were vaccinated started getting I have friends who were hospitalized, who were completely vaccinated, my age or a few years older than me. Then I was like, okay, one of my stipulations was hit, and it's now time to get this, because I don't want to get this thing, and it is way worse than what the previous virus was, the 2020 version or the 2019 version was. So I set some stipulations saying, that was one reason. Another reason was if society started to treat me like a second-rate or third-class citizen, which I started being uninvited to parties. I booked a cruise, and they said you need to, pay this extra money for this insurance, and you need to get tested like 5 times throughout your trip, and you need to pay extra for this room. And I said, I'm not even a regular customer anymore. I mean, I'm treated differently, and it's just not worth the hassle. So, there were a list of reasons that I came up with, and those reasons were hit within like a 1 week period. And I said, all right, it's time to change my mind and go ahead and get this vaccine.
2 things, if you don't mind my saying to that, because I wasn't in any way suggesting you were an anti-vaxxer, but let's go with that for 1 second. This is something that I think one of the problems that we have in the world is that when we look at something, we look at it in a vacuum. And when you said, well, okay, I want to know, with this vaccine, how it affects people, 8 years, 9 years, 10 years down the pike. I mean, first of all, by that time, all of this would have played out. But forgetting that, when you're not feeling well and when your doctor prescribes something for you, or when you go in and you buy some new food that might have something in it, you don't ask those questions. We're asking that question because it's front and center now when people are taking medications or putting sunscreen on your body, or all of the different things that have not been, and some of them that aren't even regulated, like if you know, vitamins, for instance, or any sort of natural supplement where it's not, you know, regulated at all. We don't ask that question. It's just because people are focusing on this, they're asking a question that they wouldn't ask of anything else because it just doesn't literally occur to us on that level. And I think that's part of one way to look at it that can either terrify you and keep you up all night because now you don't want to use anything ever, you know, any cleaning supply, anything that might affect you, or make you feel better because it's like, yeah, and here we still are. And, you know, nobody has sort of dropped dead from anything. And the only other thing that I would wonder from you on that level, though, is when you, it's a good story. So if you were thinking, okay, I'm young, I'm healthy, I'm practically a vegan, I take real good care of myself, I don't go, and you said it, I noticed when you were speaking, I don't go that many places. I don't interact with that many people. It's like, what would have helped? Could someone have said to say, yeah, but you do go with some people, and some people who are young do get it. And if you do get it and you get a bad case and now you're out and you have to go to the hospital, now you're putting everybody else at risk, not to mention everybody. Like, would that have helped at all? Or was it just that one thing, because I think I keep myself safe, I don't need to worry about this other stuff? Do you think that would have helped or no?
Well, I think I'm an outlier here because you brought up things that I don't. Like I told you, I'm pretty much a vegan. I'm very cautious of what I put in my body. I don't take, you know, if a doctor prescribes something, I'm not just going to go to the pharmacy and start taking it. I get second opinions, third opinions. I do my research on it. But also, these are items that are FDA regulated, that have many of these products that you bring up have been around for decades. So, you know, there's research, there's studies, they're FDA approved. Not that I'm the biggest fan of the FDA, but let's just say that they've been around for such a long time. Whereas this is a novel, talking about, you know, like the vaccine, for example, and really anything foreign that you're going to put into your body or use. I'm just personally just a bit skeptical. I'm a laggard. I'm not that guy. When the new iPhone comes out, I'm not lining up at the store trying to get it. I'm going to wait 4 or 5 months, let them work out their bugs and software updates and all that. And then I'll get it for 100% or, you know, maybe $100 off if I just wait a few more months. That's just me personally.
You know, I totally hear you because I'm the same way with medicine as well. I do not like taking it, you know, I mean, I do when I have to, obviously, but exact same thing. But I guess what I'm asking is, do you think the argument about and that's about the difference between personal, here's how I see it, and here's me and my body, and the social world outside, meaning everybody else? Like, where's the balance? And I think that's something, and again, not with you because you did get it and you were taking risks. So no way do I mean any of this goes towards you. And plus, you know, you set up this is when I'll do it, and when that happened, you actually went and did it. And I think that's,
and we're the work from home show. We work from home, so we're not going out. Now, if I was going into a physical office, you know, working at a grocery store, I would have lined up immediately. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's where we are now, is really trying to figure out individually for each of us, where is that line for us? But the other question, and the question that seems to have gone missing, I think, so much out there, and frankly, I mean, I have to admit that I am very deeply political and I don't play things close to the vest. I think way more on the right than the left, which is this notion of anything for the greater good, anything other than the sort of no one tells me what to do and it's about my personal freedom. It's like, where is the balance between I want this right, but your responsibility to other people? And that seems like it's gone very deeply askew in a lot of the, you know, this talk about vaccines and, you know, getting vaccinated or not. It seems like very often there's not the sense of being part of a community and doing things for the good of the community. Now, obviously, there's a balance. You don't do everything for the community. I think the whole goal in life, in fact, I think every story out there, and now I am talking about novels or movies or TV and every other story, is really about the cost of human connection. How much of my own autonomy do I need to give in order to connect to another person? How much of my autonomy do I need to give up in order to connect to the group that the truth is? And again, as I was saying before, that, when our brain had its last big growth spurt, which was about 100,000 years ago, and for the longest time, what you might have been taught, what I know I was taught, being way older than you, is that when we had that growth spurt, it was so that, we would get the ability to think rationally. Analytical reasoning was wired into our brains at that time, which is true. But the reason for it, what evolutionary biologists and neuroscientists will tell you now, is that wasn't why we had the growth spurt. It was because at that time, if we were going to do, what we've since done, for better or for worse, which is, take over the world, leap to the front of the food chain, we needed to do that thing that we've been taught to do since kindergarten, which is we needed to learn to work well with others. And so we do have that balance of needing to belong. And I think that that's what's so important now. And the scary thing about now was when we were wired for that, to belong to a group, the group could be no bigger than 150 people, right? And that's not like now 150 self-selecting people that were finding each other, on the web and all over the place and through social media, but like 150 people, like total max in the world that we lived in. The problem now is that we've got so many different groups, all of which are at odds with one another, that I think it's easy to lose sight of the fact that we're on one level, we're all in this together. If you think about climate change, or you think about the coronavirus, it doesn't just attack one group over another. It's biology. It's all of us. And for me, anyway, the most frightening thing now in the past, 6 years, because it's come to the surface, but certainly, writ large in the coronavirus, is that it hasn't pulled us together, that we're not fighting together, that our allegiance to our groups is stronger than biology. And that's kind of scary, I think. And that's why, in my opinion, now more than any other time is the time to really dive into story itself. And when I say story, I don't mean storytelling. I don't mean sit down and write a novel or even tell someone a story. Certainly you could do that. But I mean story in terms of how we convince other people to do things. Because for one thing, it does make us step into their worldview and really be able to try to see the world through their eyes. So we can understand really, well, why aren't they doing what we want them to do? Why don't they believe that thing that we know is true? Why don't they believe it in their opinion, not our opinion? Their opinion, and then really find a way to some degree to pull us together. And I think it also really helps to understand how we process information. That so much of what we've been taught about literally the way we process information, meaning we bring it in and we're like a computer, and if we're logical and rational, we look at it objectively in the cold light of objective reason, and we make decisions that way. And that just isn't true. I mean, we've been taught it's logic versus emotion, and logic is what you're supposed to use to make sense of everything, and anything that we feel, or the gut feeling, or anything with emotion is something that is there to lead us astray, is completely untrue. It is a false paradigm. It's not only soft science, it's a myth. It's not even true. We make every decision we ever make based on how we feel about something, and feeling and meaning, that's what emotion is. Emotion telegraphs meaning, which is why if we can dive into somebody else's worldview and see what their beliefs, whatever belief it is we want to change, what it means to them, the meaning they're reading into it, then we can start to turn around and create a story that might show them that there might be another way to look at it, another way to go. But unless we understand that first, I think we will be doomed to constantly live in our very small bubbles that are now really, as we all know, as you were just saying, that are bound in because we can find each other in ways now in social media. And so we can live in a complete bubble where we believe that the world we're in is the world. And it isn't. It's just the, QAnon, for instance. I mean, they really believe that Democrats and and celebrities are out there drinking the blood of babies. I mean, but we believe it, and the people who believe it, to kind of give us a little bit of empathy for that. I mean, think of that poor guy who was so sure he was going to go and rescue children who were being sex trafficked that he jumped in his Jeep, drove to DC, went into that pizza parlor to free them from where they were being, held by Hillary Clinton in the basement of a pizza parlor that didn't have a basement. But the point is, he thought he was doing a good thing. He was going to rescue kids. He was going to rescue people who could not help themselves. It's just that, of course, it was completely untrue. And of course, it was reinforced by the ideological bubble that he was in. And, that is what we're fighting against. I was listening to a podcast the other day where someone was saying, and the problem is, it's so easy to fall into that as you were saying before, like, around the turn of the century, it was much more difficult to find like-minded people, especially for things that then were considered fringe, because, you had to go make flyers and what you're going to staple them to trees. And you had to know what band on ham radio people were going to be on. You had to get them to actually come together in the real physical analog world and, speak to that. And now, one person says one thing and it can be amplified via, the internet, via Facebook, via, all the other, apps that are out there. And, 35 million people, I think with Trump, it was something like on Facebook, 35 million people instantly would hear what he had to say. That's really scary. No matter who it is, that's really scary. We're not wired for that reality. And yet it's the reality we find ourselves in. Again, which is why story, understanding other people, understanding the why behind why they're doing what they're doing and why they might be resistant to what you want them to do, allows you to zero in on that, what I like to call misbelief, and create a narrative that's going to show them that their misbelief isn't helping them achieve what they want to achieve. It's actually hurting them. And that's how you get people to pay attention. Because again, as I said, the way that we're wired, the only two things that cause us to change our minds about something are either an experience that proves what we believe isn't so, or a story that does the same proof by taking us literally, biologically, internally, through an experience. We've now experienced it viscerally through virtual reality that allows us to come out the other side and be transformed. Because all stories are a call to action. That's the point of a story. Story is about change. Story is about how somebody changes, but not just changes externally in terms of what they do, but how their belief system shifts so that now they know how to solve whatever problem the story has thrown at them, because stories are about problem solving. Stories are about how our worldview shifts in order for us to now be able to deal with some unexpected problem, or often the unintended consequences of the decisions that we've made, so that we can adapt and so that we can survive. Without problems, we could never survive.
So you talked about kind of the absolute need to step out and kind of, as a lot of people say, walk a mile in the other person's shoes to find the story to change their mind, and how we have all of these echo chambers where, people who watch CNN hear about how crazy conservatives are, people who watch Fox News and the other hear about all the snowflakes and how they're trying to destroy our country. What is kind of the first few steps you can take to get out of your worldview and step into somebody else's worldview so that you even have a chance at crafting a story that can change minds?
Well, I think it depends on who, just to use the business expression, who your target audience is. I mean, if it's a target audience of one, it's coming in and talking to them and going back and forth. If it's a target audience of, a group of people who you want to change their mind, then you would really dive into, okay, who exactly is your specific target audience? And then it really would be doing a lot of research. I mean, social media is terrifying. And on the other hand, there's some great things it's done, like everything, there's pros and cons. The cons very well might outweigh the pros at the end of the day. But right now, I mean, other than, having a focus group, you really can go in and figure out, okay, who specifically is your target audience? who specifically is going to benefit from what that change that you want them to make, and what is that specific benefit that they would see, as opposed to the benefit that you think it's going to be. And then really it is diving in and figuring out whether it's going online and following them. Who do they follow on Instagram? What do they post? What are they afraid of? What do they like? What are their comments? And really coming around and figuring out, okay, given that thing, what is stopping them from doing what it is that you want to do? Because I think that's really the key thing, because often when we come and we want to change someone's mind about something, we just want to give them the facts. And the problem is when we give them facts, not only do we give them the facts that would convince us, and they are not us, but we give them facts that we can unpack. So boots on the ground, we understand how that fact would actually affect someone actually in their lives. Is it going to help them or hurt them achieve their agenda? And when the person hears it, whose minds are trying to change, all they hear is that fact. They can't maybe even unpack the fact very often. And then the other problem that we have on that level is we assume that they're going to read the same meaning into that fact. And once they read the meaning in, of course, they're going to hear the call to action and do what we want them to do. And chances are either you've got them thinking, I know that person's trying to tell me something really, really important. I just have no idea what it is. Or angry because they do understand what you want, and now you've come up against their own belief system. So yeah, it is really going in. Is it easy? No, of course not. But can it be done? Absolutely. But it does take research, and it does take going in and pulling yourself out of not just looking at what they do, not just looking at the surface thing, or even imagining the reasons why you think they're doing what they're doing, but really trying to dive in and figure out, why does it matter to them? Now, obviously, if it's a person, if it's a boss who you want to give you a raise, or you're trying to get your kid to stop texting and driving, please, it's really coming down and understanding, for instance, with trying to get your teenager to not text and drive, it's, well, what does it really mean to them to do that? Why are they doing it? What is it that you're actually asking them to give up? And that can come in asking open-ended, non-judgmental questions, just, okay, but why? Or what would happen if you stopped? Or what are you worried about? That sort of thing. And sometimes when you know someone well enough, like, sometimes teens do shut themselves off and you feel like you don't know them at all. But if you do, or if it's your significant other, you can do your own sort of, mind experiment and keep asking and thinking about what they would come up with. But really the key thing is, as difficult as it is to sort of let go of what you believe and to not judge or roll your eyes or, think they're idiots. At best you might think, they've been tragically misinformed, which, very well might be true.
Can you give me an example of kind of maybe somebody you've worked with or some campaign you've seen that really did a good job of transforming the narrative and really connecting with people?
The things I can think of, like off the top of my head, really are more the examples that I used in the book. Because everything else, the trouble with reaching into something and bringing it out in a few words is that everything is so much more complex than that it would take so long to set it up and then get down to it. The one that and it's an example that I use in the book that I think is fabulous, and it was from, it was a campaign that Always did, which makes, feminine hygiene products, to use a euphemism from way back when, although they probably still use it. And they were trying to figure out why girls and women had been moving away from their product. And what they realized was, in doing their research, was that it had nothing to do with, and this is what we usually use in order to convince someone to use our product. It didn't have to do with how effective the product was. It didn't have to do with whether the product worked. It didn't have to do with if in this category of product, it was the world's best product. That wasn't going to bring them in because they were already selling based on that. But people were sort of pulling away from that, largely because in that sense, it was built around sort of the notion from back in the day that, nobody ever wanted to even admit that they got a period, let alone talk about it. And therefore, an effective product, is the be all and the end all, because the last thing you wanted to do was, have an accident and be embarrassed. But what they realized was that in order to appeal to their audience, and as they said this, they wanted to appeal to them emotionally, they wanted to matter to them, they needed to go down and figure out, well, what matters to their audience. And what their research showed was that girls that by the time they hit puberty, their self-esteem took a dive. Really interestingly, both genders, self-esteem takes a dive at puberty, but boys' self-esteem comes up and keeps going after puberty. Girls' self-esteem often never gets back to where it was or gets any higher than that. And what they realized was that a big reason for that, again, they did research, and research showed that a big reason for that was because at about that age, 12, 13, there started to be a lot of gendered insults, and girls started to feel really put down. And so they were thinking, okay, and if they just explained that to them, who would pay attention? Who would even care? It would just be facts. But what they realized is, okay, so what insults? Like, what are we talking about? And the one that they centered on was like a girl. And this was, you might remember this, because here's the interesting thing about this campaign. It was hashtag like a girl. They did a 2-minute video, and then in 2015 they did they put it onto the Super Bowl. Right now, this was the first time, obviously not obviously, but it's easy to believe that this was the first time a quote unquote feminine hygiene product was ever advertised at the Super Bowl. It's a product that men can't use no matter what. So how could it possibly garner an audience? And it turned out to be the highest rated video campaign during the 2015 Super Bowl. It had the highest rating for feeling hot, for positive feelings, for joy, for feeling empowered. It changed the way not only girls, I think it was something like when they went in, it was like girls, I think it was like 12 to, was it 34 or 24? Had something like 70% of them had a bad view of like a girl, or had a good view of like a girl. Had a bad view, because their goal was to change the meaning of like a girl, which is what they did. And they did completely flip it at the end. It was a much lower ratio that didn't like a girl, because the goal was to take back that notion of like a girl and have it not mean what it's taken to mean, and the reason why it's a put down. It's like she throws like a girl, she runs like a girl, she hits like a girl, meaning not very well, right? In other words, if you're a girl, you don't run very well, you don't hit very well, so why even try? And what the ad did was take that back. And the way that the ad did it was to have, and again, this might be familiar to you, but what they did was they had a sound stage, and it was done by, I think Lauren Greenfield was her name, who's a documentary director. She directed The Queen of Versailles, which is a great documentary. Anyway, so it was just an open casting call, and it was young boys and young girls. And so she brought them in, and they had no idea what the casting was for. In other words, they had no idea they were in a commercial. They had no idea that this was going to be used for this particular product. And so the first thing that she said was, she brought these girls up and she said, okay, I just want you to show me, if I say, what does it look like to run like a girl? And they're just like, they're you can just picture, they're prancing, they're like pushing their hair, they're giggling, it's as if they sort of know it's a joke. They're playing out this stereotype. If you're a girl, you're kind of silly and you're not really running. They go to one guy, a teenage guy, and they go, what does it look like to fight like a girl? And he literally does this double take, like girls don't fight. What are you even talking about? And then he sort of like giggles and bats his hands, as like he's sort of trying to ineffectually shoo a fly. They had a much younger boy, about a 12-year-old, and he said, what does it look like to throw like a girl? And he's mimicking, right? So he like pulls his hand as if he's holding a ball all the way back to his shoulder and kind of accidentally drops it and goes, oops, and giggles. In other words, point being, all of these kids got it. All of these kids understood. None of them thought they were being misogynist or sexist or even mean to girls. It was just, this is what it means to throw like a girl or run like a girl. They were showing that they were sort of in on it, that they were, in the know. And then she brings forward, and I'm trying to remember how all of this goes, but she brings forward a younger girl, and she says, okay, like, what does it mean to run like a girl? And she just looks at her, she goes, well, it means to run as fast as you can. So in other words, when they bring the prepubescent girls down, before they've been socialized into this notion that if you're a girl, you are lesser than, they were just, well, you run as fast as you can, you throw as well as you can. And then they brought another girl back, one of the ones, I don't think she'd been in the first one, and said, well, when you hear that, throw like a girl, like, what does that sound like to you? And she says, well, it sounds sort of like an insult. It sounds like they're putting you down. It sounds like they're saying you're not as good as them. Now, as we're watching these things happen, never once does Greenfield or anyone in this ad try to tell them what to think, try to shame them for what they believed in the beginning. Nor does she try to, is she the one to tell them, well, that's really an insult. You know, that's an insult, don't you? Instead, she had the younger girl simply talk about, what would it mean to run like a girl? Well, you know, it means you run as fast as you can. Then she asked the younger girl, again, who was, I think she was about that same age, who said, well, yeah, it does sound like an insult. So in other words, the story wasn't telling them what to think. The story wasn't giving them facts. The story was allowing them to experience first the stereotype, then to see what it was like pre-stereotype, meaning when girls were, you know, before they were old enough to be socialized in that way. Then they were coming back and asking, well, wait a minute, you know, how do you feel when someone says that? And then we get the, yeah, that doesn't feel good. And then the last bit of it was she brought some of the girls back in the beginning who had, you know, done the very, you know, prancy sort of way of running that wasn't really running at all, and said, you know, if I asked you to run like a girl again, would you do it differently? And she says, yeah, absolutely. I'd run like myself. Now, again, in that story, nobody told anybody what to do. Nobody told anybody the facts. Nobody shamed them for what they walked in there believing, but they all left believing something else because the story allowed them to experience their misbelief. Oh yeah, you run like a girl. It's, you know, that means you can't run that well. And what that did was, right, so what does that have to do with, you know, with feminine hygiene products? And the answer is, well, absolutely nothing. But what it did was it made the audience, those girls and women watching it, think, yeah, that company, that product, they get me. They care about me. They see the real me. In fact, they see good in me that society taught me not to see. And now I realize I can really be my, and I hate using this word because it's so hackneyed, but my authentic self even more. I don't have to run in some funny, foofy way or pretend I can't throw because society tells me I can't. Because, I mean, that's the problem with those sorts of self-fulfilling prophecies. It starts out as fiction and becomes fact because they've internalized it and felt, I'm not as good as. And again, I think it might have been a year later, they actually got an award from the United Nations for helping around the world empower girls, you know, via that ad. So I don't know if that answered your question, and it was a long way of going around because I don't usually give that example, and it is, again, that was, I warned you that it might be long, and that was a long one. But I think it gives the whole notion also of what a story is. You go in with a misbelief, then you have decided, here's the misbelief, the thing that, because we all know run like a girl, throw like a girl isn't true, that women can run just as well as men or throw or whatever. It doesn't mean that because they're female, they can't do it. There's a misbelief, but it's been inculcated. Well, what's the truth? The truth is, you know, women can do whatever they can run fast and throw well and fight well. And that's not so. So first they got the misbelief, then they got the truth from the younger girls. Well, if someone says run like a girl, it means, you know, I just run as fast as I can. Then they had a realization, wait a minute, I've been misled by that. That is a misbelief. That's been keeping me from being, you know, my complete and whole self. And then they have a transformation. And the transformation is first a transformation within that belief system, which is let's take back like a girl, meaning do it as well as you can, meaning, you know, as well as anybody could. It is something empowering as opposed to something that is self-limiting. And then that transformation actually is carried out into the world. Those women and girls and men. It also transformed men after the Super Bowl ad. I think it was some large number that would have used like a girl in the negative way. And then afterwards, it was a much lower number who would ever use that expression. And the transformation also went to, and I'm going to buy your product, because what they wanted, what their call to action was, interestingly, with that always ad, the call to action, I mean, at the end of the day, of course, they wanted people, you know, to buy more of their product for sure. But the call to action was the thing they had wanted people to do was to be able to use their logo on social media. And if their logo was was only tied to periods, because let's face it, no matter what, there's always going to be some level of ick factor. They're not going to, who's going to put something out on social media with an always logo? Their goal was to have that happen more. And I think it was like their YouTube channel that that was now, it was like 4,337% higher. I mean, they had something like during the Super Bowl, I think it was 400,000, tweets and retweets of their logo. They certainly achieved what they wanted to achieve by that. But again, as you can see, it wasn't by convincing them to use their product. It wasn't by how great their product was. It wasn't about anything that had to do with them, meaning the company. It was focusing on their audience and how did their audience see themselves and how could they give their audience a benefit that their audience themselves would see as a benefit. And that's what led to that campaign. And it was, as I say, wildly successful.
One thing I've learned, Lisa, I worked at one of the largest publishing companies, and I don't know how you got started with storytelling or the writing process, but working at this publishing company gave me a look into how to sell stories. That's really what they were doing at the end of the day, how to sell stories. And it was incredible because the biggest takeaway I learned is that there will always be a large segment of people who will believe anything. They will believe anything. And and so going into that job, I didn't know that because I was young and naive. I was fresh out of graduate school, and I didn't really know what to think. And maybe I'm still like that right now. When I brought up the example earlier of, look, my mind's willing to be changed if the story's good, really, if the facts and data are good enough. But people will believe anything, and this ties into just something that I disagree with you on, and that is you brought up, the group, the community, and I see things the other way. I'm an individualist. So I think people, in fact, our show prides itself on people taking personal responsibility and creating wealth and value on their own and not being dependent on a group or a community or an employer or the government or whoever it is. It's, we teach people how to make money from home. The subtitle of our show is Learn How to Invest and Make Money from Home, whether it's starting a business, whether it's investing, partnering, but it's also not just money related, but it's also health related. We do a lot of episodes on health. We've done at least 10 of them because health and wellness tie into success, mental success, spiritual success, etc. And so we've done several episodes on taking control of your health. And I brought up earlier, the vegan diet or pure vegetarian diet, don't put bad things in your body, exercising, making sure you're getting the proper nutrients, enough sleep, etc. This is all personal responsibility, which surprisingly, as one of our health experts came on previously, he said, look, everyone knows what's right, like what's good for you, but people still don't do it. That comes down to personal responsibility. It's not the community's job to try to force it on them. I mean, there are enough public service announcements, there are enough, the media's there, social media, advertisements on Instagram, Facebook. I mean, you're bombarded with all these things. At the end of the day, it comes down to the individual to make those decisions. Hey, you know what? I want to live until I'm 95 years old. And these are the ways that I can go about improving myself so that I can live until I'm 95. But most people, they're just thinking about today and, what can I do today to just, live life?
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with you. I mean, listen, I work from home and I, like you, maybe even sort of more so, I do everything by myself. I mean, I have my own business. I do literally everything myself on that level. And of course, personal responsibility is important, but it isn't separate from, first of all, we do all need each other because while you're home with your personal responsibility, making money and doing that, your significant other is doing things that's keeping your life going, if you own your house, your bank is, the people around you, the roads outside that you're driving. We all need each other on that level. It's not binary. It's not one or the other. And obviously, yes, of course we need to be responsible. But I think that one of the things that frightens me when I hear personal responsibility, I hear people say, and this does not sound like you at all, but everybody has their personal responsibility. Therefore, I'm not responsible for anything that has anything to do with anybody else. And that's where it's just 100%.
Well, that's an opaque way to look at life. I get my philosophy more so. I don't know. I'm sure you've looked at the philosophies of objectivism, Randian, Ayn Rand, and there are some economic philosophies that I disagree with. But when it comes to just general moral philosophies, her philosophy was, look, you must focus on yourself, because what's going to happen is when you focus on yourself, that's going to have a reverberating effect on those around you and improve society at large. If people took more responsibility, instead of just saying, I'm going to become fat, eat at McDonald's, whatever. And then eventually when I do get unhealthy, well, a doctor's going to take care of me. I'm going to go on Medicare, Medicaid, or whatever. And, some doctor is going to think. In fact, I knew one of my former bosses who I really, really respected, learned a ton from. And he, would say that he was personally responsible in a lot of ways. But when it came to his health, his philosophy was, oh yeah, I'll end up in the hospital someday, but the doctor's just going to do a surgery and fix me. And that's what ended up happening. The doctor, was like a quadruple bypass surgery. I mean, he smoked a lot, he drank a lot, he ate out every meal. He drank like a beer every meal. He was a very unhealthy guy, and he ended up in the ER, had emergency quadruple bypass surgery. And then after the surgery, he said, oh, see, look, I told you they'd fix me. And then 4 years later, he passed. And the doctors even told him, they said, look, this is just a temporary fix. You're going to have to change this and this and this and this. And
I hear what you're saying 100%. Two things. That one is, sadly, on one level, we aren't wired to look at the big picture. I know people are like, why can't you see the big picture? And I'm not saying we shouldn't, because you're right, we should, but we're not wired to do that. We're wired to live in a world. As I'm so fond of saying, we're wired to live in a world we don't live in anymore. We are literally biologically wired to live in a world where making it to tomorrow is sort of a major accomplishment. So that thinking about something and a reward you might get in the future, we're literally not wired to work that way. And second of all, the only place where I would really take exception to you there is that, and it comes back to that logical, the notion everything's on a level playing field, and we can intellectually decide, as if there is a difference between intellect or mind and, I hate even mind body. It's all one thing, and it all has to do with wiring. And I'm sure one of the reasons, I'm sure what he said to you was probably pretty glib anyway, and my guess is he probably felt, how people are, they'll go, oh yeah, I eat terrible and I'm fat and I'm awful and I really like it, and they're sort of dying. They're thinking, yeah, I think you bought it because they want to put on the good front. But if it was easy, if people could just decide, I'm going to eat less and drink less and I'll be fine, and make that decision, we'd all be thin. It doesn't work that way. The reasons we do what we do are so deeply inculcated in the way that we see things, and we shame ourselves so much for not being able just to change overnight or to make a decision and do it. But the why behind why we're doing what we're doing and why we believe what we believe is so deep that it takes a lot to get down and to actually make some sort of actual change. Because,
it takes therapy, deep therapy.
It does. It does. It also takes, I think, really understanding how the brain works. Like, I remember once I was listening to a show that I used to really like on KPCC out here, and they were talking to the interviewer who I liked, and I can't remember who she was interviewing, but they were talking about, some people, they're so insecure, they're just always wondering, what people think of them all the time, and they've got such low self-esteem that does that. And I was screaming at the radio, which is, we are all wired to constantly worry about what other people think of us. because that is how we survived. Because back in the day, if someone didn't like us, they could hit us over the head and throw us off a cliff. So we're all wired to make people like us, even the barista at Starbucks. We want everybody to like us. We're all wired to wonder what other people are thinking because we want to be safe, right? And are you going to help me or are you going to hurt me? And the problem is because we have somehow been taught this paradigm where we make that decision and it's some sort of logical, I hate using this word, unemotional, unfeeling, thinking decision. It literally isn't how we make sense of things. It literally isn't how the brain works. And it makes us shame ourselves. And now that poor person who's wondering what other people think, now they're not only worried about that, they're worried about that somehow it means they have low self-esteem. And now they went from one thing to another thing. And the truth is, we're all thinking about that. I'm reading a book now, I'm just started actually. I heard this woman on Ezra Klein's podcast, Annie Murphy Paul, called The Extended Mind, and it's called The Power of Thinking Outside the Brain. And she talks about how we've been taught this notion that our brains are computers, right? And so you just give information in, and the same information or the same decision is going to be made no matter what. There's no mitigating anything if it's hot, if it's cold, if it's day, if it's night, if it's And that just literally isn't the way we make decisions. It isn't the way that we process the world. Most of the decisions that we make, truly, what do they say? We make 35,000 decisions a day. And of those decisions, we're only consciously aware of 70 of them. Most of the decisions we make are relegated by our cognitive unconscious. In other words, we have that avidity for patternicity, which is why you should never use a $25 word, because what does that even mean? But from the time we're born, we're looking for if-then patterns. If I cry, if I cry really loud, that nice lady is going to come in and give me milk. Got it. And once there's a familiar pattern, it gets relegated to our cognitive unconscious, so we don't have to think about it anymore. And most of those decisions we're making are coming from that place. And then our conscious brain, if we even think about it, tries to reverse engineer why we did it. And it's really why you can tell yourself early in the day, I'm not going to eat after dinner tonight. I promise I'm not. And still you find yourself reaching for something at 10 o'clock at night. Not because you're weak or because you're emotional or but because biologically that's what's going to make you feel safe. And there are other ways to stop that, but shaming yourself for it is a surefire way to keep doing it over and over and over again and just feel worse about yourself. That's why I think, and in Story or Die, I spent the first 3 chapters deeply going into it. I think is the most important part, which is how we really process information, why we really remember things, what it is that causes us to do what we do via biology, so that we can sort of stop shaming ourselves, really understand ourselves. And when we want to change, forget changing other people. How about changing our own minds? Like you were saying, that poor guy who couldn't stop eating so much and, drinking the way he drank and ended up, eating himself and drinking himself into an early grave. If we understood the real reasons why, and it isn't about gutting it out or having willpower or whatever, it would allow us to maybe make those changes so we could live, longer, healthier, more prosperous lives. I'm all for that. And like I say, I totally agree with you about personal responsibility, but it's a balance, right? It's not binary. It's not binary. It's personal responsibility. With the personal responsibility and the rights that we get, we've got responsibilities. And a lot of the responsibilities are to, the community at large, because we are all working together or, against each other, depending.
That's Lisa Cron, multiple #1 best-selling author. Go on Amazon, find her books. They are incredible. Just a really, really immersive discussion that we've had here. The website is wiredforstory.com. That's wiredforstory.com. Lisa, any final thoughts you want to share with our listeners or anything else you'd like to promote?
I don't have anything else I would like to promote, but just to say, I think the most important thing right now is the ability to listen without judging. And it doesn't mean that you agree with a person. It doesn't mean that they're right. And it doesn't mean that everything's neutral. But it means if you can really listen and really hear, because nobody listens to you unless they feel heard. You might find that place where you connect. You might find things in your own self that you believe that you didn't realize you believed, or a place with somebody who you thought, you were completely at odds with, where you do come together, and that might allow you both to expand what you believe and to really come together and to get that thing that we all want, which is that sense of human connection. Because without that, what's the point?
I think that's a really good taught or a really good piece of advice that you gave, which quite frankly, I think I've lost sight of over the past few years for whatever reasons. And that is, I think it's a quality that made me more likable and have better relations with friends, family members. And that's, like you said, listening without judging. And I try not to judge people. I love all ideas. But I got to tell you, over the past couple of years, I've just seen some ideas that are so out there. Like you brought up the whole QAnon. I mean, I do tend to lean right, but I don't agree with any of these. I do judge these ideas because they're just so out there. And then even on the left, I mean, I read a story today that there are medical schools in California where students are trying to get the professors to change I don't want to say the curriculum, but the language and how they talk about X chromosomes, Y chromosomes, men, women, mothers, pregnant women. That's the phrase that went viral. It's the banning of the term a pregnant woman. And, I read these things and I do tend to pass a judgment in my mind. But at the same time, I think, like you said, listening is very important. And I'd actually love to meet more people because I have met people like this, and I'd love to meet more people like this. And like you said, empathy and understand their perspective and, just why they think that way and what their goals are. I think just listening and having that conversation is a step in the right direction.
Right, because I think, and if you don't mind my going on for one more second, I think, and I that's on the very edges of, I remember something about what you were talking about. And I think a lot of it has to do with the way things are changing so much in terms of gender, both gender being societally defined, which is my opinion, all gender is just a societal definition as opposed to anything that's actually biological. And, I think pregnant women came up in the notion of people being transgender and what that meant. And I think certainly things can be taken, if you look at that outlier or something where people are just trying to figure it out, it can sound like it's way out there. But like I said, if you go in and you try to figure out, but what are they really saying? What do they really mean by that? As opposed to just getting angry. Now, I'm not saying you're angry, but just getting angry, going, well, they said that we can't use this word and how dare they and what do they mean? Going, well, what are they really trying to get at and what is it really and why? And who is the person that used it? In other words, I think everything, and this is the point, everything's contextual. Nothing is easy to rip something out and then read your own meaning into it or read meaning into it separately from the context from which it came. And I think there's lots of really interesting, discussions that can come up from that. But again, a lot of it has to do with, we are wired to think in sound bites, lie and run. So it makes sense that we would hear one thing and then read all of our own meaning into it and then assume that's what they meant and go off that way. Both the right and the left, everybody. And I'll say one thing about the right. They are way better at messaging than the left. The left sucks at messaging, sucks at it. Defund the police. Stupid. Are you kidding me?
But it went viral. I would tend to disagree. I was going to say I actually disagree because, okay, so if you deconstruct defund the police, but you don't want a message that you have to, the first thing after it, you have to say, it's not, I didn't say it didn't go viral. It went viral in a negative sense. The last thing you want is messaging where right after you have to say, okay, but it's not what it sounds like. Because the way the brain works is, it is, and I hate using this word, but it's the word they all use, lazy. Lazy carries so much baggage with it, but the brain is lazy.
because it's always got to be on the lookout for something that might clobber us. So it'll take the most shortcuts to try to figure out what's going on. You hear defund the police, it sounds like it means defund, take all the money away. The police, okay, if somebody's breaking in my house, I got nobody to call. That's horrifying. And when they go, well, but that's not really what we mean. What we really mean is, and what they really meant is a good thing, but it's not what it sounds like.
Yeah. No,
That's
I agree. And the right ran with that.
totally.
Because once I started looking into it, then I was like, oh, again, this is what we brought up earlier in the interview, and that is being open to the idea. So I was like, this is interesting, like, okay, if they're defunded, well, what's the alternative? And they had a plan for the alternatives and hiring, social workers and social workers going along with police officers to helping diffuse situations. And I said, look, like if you're in the south side of Chicago, and, I don't think a social worker is going to go at 4 a.m. in the morning and expecting to diffuse a shootout where 10 to 15 people are getting shot every Friday evening, at least at a minimum. But at the same time, I thought, well, it's an interesting idea, and it's worth it's worth trying in different markets, different places, and if it works, great. That's part of. I'm actually a liberal. I'm a classical liberal who just ended up leaning right because that's what I was told that I am, given the way society has changed. But I'm open to all sorts of new ideas, and if it works, great. If it doesn't work, well, at least you tried it and you know that it doesn't work, and you move on. That's just, in business, that's how business works. Like right now I have 2 profitable businesses, but I have like 8 that didn't work. They didn't work out. I made $0 from them. In fact, I lost money from them, but that's how it is. That's how life is.
I could not agree with you more, but you're not someone who takes I heard this is what I think it is, and I'm going to run with it. You're like, I heard this, let me think about it for a minute. And I would say that's everybody. That's the other thing. You hear something, wait, think about it for a minute. What's the why behind it? What might they really mean? What's going on? Because a lot of this stuff with defund the police, I think is great. It was just the messaging that was so bad,
Well, I will say they raised a lot of money for the initiative. They still continue to raise. In fact, there were police departments that did end up being defunded in major cities. So it did work. From a political perspective, maybe if you're a moderate Democrat, then you're like, no, like this is not good. But I think from a storytelling perspective, if that's what they wanted, well, they did very well. They raised a lot of money and they had some changes made.
Yeah, but so did the right on the other side. I think they could have come up with something much better and something that was clearer as to what they meant, because they didn't mean what it said. And I think, again, I think knowing your audience and knowing what they're going to read into it and having something simple and clear, it makes all the, look at the right now is running with cancel culture, which I think is something that can then be applied to anything, almost always not what it means, but it's a great, sadly, it's a great tagline. It's fabulous because it sounds like something unfair is being done to somebody for no reason. And, in many cases, in most cases, it's somebody's going to suffer the consequences of their actions. That's a good thing. Are there always going to be cases where things go too far in one direction or the other? Of course. I always figure that with anything out there, there's going to be 10% of anything that's going to be scammed, that's going to be wrong, that's going to be, that's human nature by definition.
Yeah, and I'll also say regarding these terms that we're using, defund the police, cancel culture, I teamed up with a very, very good team of creatives to create this children's book, and we shopped the idea around to publishers, and the book was centered around the idea of cancel culture, of like wokeness. That's another one, wokeness, cancel culture. And we ended up we got declined by every single, this was a great set of talent that we had. The marketing, the following was already there, and we got rejected by every publisher. And the overarching theme, and this is what I found interesting, because I haven't been around the publishing block over the course of many decades, but they came back, and the overarching theme was, these are the buzzwords right now today, but we don't think the theme has a long shelf life. You know, in another 4 to 5 years, all these ideas and concepts, they're going to be out the door, and it's going to be something new. And I was kind of surprised because, you know, as a media consumer, you think, oh, this is how things are going to be forever, and the country is going to be destroyed, and this and that. And, you know, these publishers and agents were just like, hey, you know, this is just a 3-4 year thing, and then it's on to the next thing. We don't think this is going to sell. It might sell this year if we could push it out this year, but 10 years from now, we're looking for the book that's going to be selling 10, 15, 20 years from now. And we don't think this theme is going to resonate. So I found that pretty interesting.
Yeah, I hope that's true. It's not for you, but I hope in the world that that's true, because I think that, you know, the notion of cancel culture and what it's used for is so erroneous. I would love to see that nuanced in a particular way and applied in the way that it needs to be applied. You know, because there are a lot of places where people need to suffer, you know, I mean, the consequences of their actions. And but with everything that's new, you know, it's going to find its place, right? It's going to find its. Are there some people who are getting canceled, like, you know, Al Franken back in the day, or maybe, you know, Aziz Ansari? Yeah, maybe there were people who got canceled who shouldn't have, and there's certainly a lot of people who.
Oh, there are a lot of people. I got canceled. I mean,
Yeah.
it was the listeners know that I got canceled because I supported or I was against one political idea, and the media. This was during the peak election season of 2020, and I was on a webinar, and some reporter got into the webinar and recorded the thing, and then cut out my 2 minutes of audio with the senator of Mississippi, who I was also on with. She was up for re-election, and then they made a huge deal out of nothing. I mean, they made a big deal about where I worked previously. I mean, I worked for one of the most prestigious. That's like saying, you know, oh, this guy worked for JP Morgan Chase, and Chase has had thousands of lawsuits over the last 10 years against it. They're a fraudulent company. Well, I mean, they're a huge corporation, and that's just part of business when you're that big. But that's essentially what they did. He worked for this company that had this lawsuit against it, and he worked there 10 years ago. Therefore, he's a bad person. And then the senator had to put out a statement distancing herself from me. And then they asked the organization that brought us on, they said, can you just keep him away until after the election? So I was supposed to do a big keynote, and they said, hey, you know what, like, we don't want to cancel. We don't want to give in to canceling you, but you know, we want to maintain relations with this person for the future. And, you know, we'll just cancel you right now and maybe get you back on, like, once things get quiet. So
Yeah. That is the terrifying thing. I mean, it's very true. Things, it goes to that point. Things can be taken out of context. You know, things can be, you know, somebody says something for 2 minutes and seconds of it is there.
I was flattered, actually. I was like, wow, like, I'm just a regular guy working from home. And now all of a sudden, you know, I'm on the front page of like these 4 major like left-wing media publications, and they're like basically going into my resume and pumping me up, pumping my credentials up, where I went to school, what my degrees are, where I worked. And people started emailing me saying, wow, you've accomplished a lot in life. Congratulations.
Yeah, it goes both ways. But I mean, I think that's the scary thing again about, you know, the internet and social media. Because, I mean, I don't think in the past anybody could get quote unquote canceled because it just has to happen so fast. You know, it's fast and wide, which is what we've got now. But yeah, I think it will find, and they'll find another thing to call it after that. I think right now cancel culture is an easy thing to throw around, you know, sort of a one size fits all in terms of if you want to turn around and tar someone or some idea. It's, you know, it's something to throw at because what does it even really mean? I mean, that's the That's the other part of it. So, well, I hope you get uncanceled.
Yeah, things have really settled down. So anyway, without further ado, once again, Lisa Cron, get her books on Amazon. Just a really awesome, deep conversation. Wiredforstory.com. And to all our listeners, check us out at workfromhomeshow.com. If you have any questions, hello@workfromhomeshow.com. Don't cancel us. We try not to get canceled. But if you are offended by anything that we say, hello@workfromhomeshow.com. Once again, hello@workfromhomeshow.com. We want to hear your feedback. And until next week, keep on working from home.